Blessings, brothers and sisters. Greetings. It's me, Lori Ann Spagna of LoriSpagna.com, here with you today just to take a few moments to talk again a little bit more about the upcoming 2022 portal and the window of this particular gateway portal of the month of February. If you haven't seen the other video that I just did about the 2022 portal, please watch that first because it really talks about the portal itself. But I want to talk about the concept that what's going to be coming to light for the collective during this time who aren't as necessarily plugged into the Ascension timeline in a conscious way. In other words, they're going through the timeline, but they're typically following what we call a false narrative on a false timeline. It's not really false. It's more like the unconscious, manufactured, inorganic, unnatural storyline, which we refer to as the world storyline. Let's call it that. So this portal, for those on the Ascension journey, that's what the other video is about, more about coming into multidimensional consciousness with our multidimensional selves. Watch that video if you haven't seen that one. For those of you on the Ascension timeline, the Awakening timeline, for those of us or those humans who are just starting to wake up, what they're going to be experiencing more of is the realizations of the difference between, really learning more about the difference between what is true and what is truth. And so one of the most basic examples I can give you in this particular example is that in the physical world, part of that 3D false timeline involves the manipulation of storyline to serve a private agenda, a secret, covert agenda that is based on service to the personal benefit to the harm of the many, and at the expense of the many, by giving mis and disinformation and particularly deliberately confusing the many. And we call that a narcissistic program running. Very often we call it a narcissistic program because the program is designed to create a false authority figure, whether that false authority figure is the news media or a mad scientist or a government leader or a world leader. It doesn't matter. False authority figures presenting a false narrative and then using the energy typically of fear and running certain programs, which are typically divide and conquer programs, separate and stir up the energy with what we call flying monkeys in narcissism, flying monkeys, which is basically talking heads who give all these different points of view. This is true, no, this is true, no, this is true, no, that's to confuse people. That's part of that false narrative that's running on a narcissistic program. So there's this divide and conquer to put people in division and argument and debate. They run a false skeptic program. So the skeptic is positioned as someone who is very smart and skeptical, and a non-believer, a doubter, so they can infuse that energy of skepticism and doubt and disbelief, while all the flying monkeys, that's a narcissistic term, come out and present. And these flying monkeys are typically, they're either experts or they will represent a minority group within the collective, such as a minority group of women, or a minority group of gays, or a minority group of transsexuals, or a minority group of Black or African American, or it doesn't matter, any minority group, and then that minority of the group representing the kind of flying monkey will promote the agenda of the narcissism, which is the false agenda, the false narrative. And this flying monkey is designed to get that minority group to come on board and agree with the false narrative. So they go after small segments of the population, and then at the same time pose many experts bringing forward conflicting information so as to confuse, divide, and conquer, and also offer the energy of skepticism, doubt, and disbelief with various experts, sometimes in minority groups and other times not, so that everybody continues to be incredibly confused. And then when people finally, in this other timeline, get to the point where they realize they don't know what's truth and they feel about as powerless as they possibly can, and then they start to bring themselves up and dust themselves off and say, okay, well, I'm just going to go out and live my life. It is at that moment when the narcissistic agenda, which usually, again, has is run by like psychopaths who appear to be the most charismatic world leaders of some kind or another, posing as some kind of expert or false authority. At that point, when people finally begin to dust themselves off and say, okay, well, I'm just going to go out and live my life, they do the narcissistic program called love bombing, where they say, we're all in this together. We're in this together. We're the heroes. So they lure you back in. They lure you, the people on this false narrative timeline, back into the storyline. They hook you back in by love bombing you with these kinds of like, we're the unsung heroes and we support our troops, and all of these kinds of dialogues that will, change doesn't come from the top, it comes from the bottom. They lure you back in so that now your emotional heartstrings, are pulled on, and that's how you get back in. And in the news programs, typically the way they do that is at the end of the newscast of all bad news, they show you a nice cat being rescued or a nice dog being rescued from a well or something to make you feel good. In commercials, the way they do it is they play some nice music while they're promoting a sick agenda, and they'll show you someone who's throwing a football and how good life can be when you take their pharmaceutical drug. These kinds of examples, that's how the false narrative works. That's the decoding. Now, if you can start to witness that as the overall, the way it's presented, that's the pattern for the most part. That's the pattern. And then within that, you can begin to see what we call the characters. So you have your mad scientist characters, and you have your expert world leaders, and you have your medical doctors presenting in ways that support the false narrative. I'm not saying everybody's like that. I'm just saying that that's what's presented to the people on that timeline. So if you can kind of decode that timeline, you can start to see the character portrayals. And one of the other key tools that's very commonly used that I didn't mention, that's worthy of mentioning, is the character assassin. So if somebody disagrees, like whether it's somebody who's standing up to that system, they'll character assassin, right? They will character assassin whoever's standing up or standing out or speaking up or speaking out, and then they go after that person. This is very commonly done especially in governments, with world leaders, but anyone who disagrees with the narrative will become a target of character assassin. So if you can decode it from that perspective, you can start to see that this is what humans in the false narrative timeline are going to begin, they're already beginning more and more to see that game play out. Now, if you're very progressed on your Ascension timeline, you already have identified that game. You've already seen that. That's the game. That's the way it plays out. It's over and over again the same story. Different story with the same patterning is what I mean to say. So what's going to happen now through this next portal of the 2022 window is that the people on that false timeline with the false narrative are going to start seeing this more and more. And this is good news. And our job is to do what we can to facilitate that to be digested with ease and grace and benevolence so they can wake up to the difference between what is true and what is truth. And so I want to pose this to you because you see, in the in the realms of the third dimensional reality, or the physical world that we've been living in this old reality that we're all breaking free from, this old reality was based on argument, debate, and disagreement, argument, discussion, debate, and so you kind of could never know what was true or what wasn't true. And we ultimately realized that truth is the perspective of the person, because what you believe is true will show up. What any one person believes is true will show up in their reality as true. So if I believe that I can't get a good job without an education, because I'm told that, for example, that my reality will present that as true, because that's the way quantum reality works. If I believe that I can't make any money without a job, well, that reality will present to me as true. If I believe that there's a horrible, terrible, deadly virus out there, if I believe that, then that my physical reality will present that to me as true, because that's the way this paradigm works. So in this case, what is true is perspective. Perspective is what's true. But in the new paradigm, which is this new magnetic grid that we're shifting in, we must know the difference between what is true, what is perspective, and what is absolute truth. And so we're shifting, and this will affect us greatly in the coming year as a collective and as individuals. We will be determining it. And by the way, that's linked to the number 2 in numerology. We will be determining more and more what is the difference between what is true and what is truth. And we will be using more and more discernment. By the way, 2022 can be linked to the also discernment. We will be developing more and more of our discernment as we navigate our way out of the false timeline in all areas of life. We're all dipping in there and out of there at different points of our reality, and shifting into what is absolute truth. And while this is a much longer conversation than we can have at this particular moment, I would like to pose to you a very basic example of understanding something to use as a tool. There are some things, it does not matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what you believe. Truth is truth. So, for example, you can believe that Anthony Fauci is a woman, but it does not matter if you believe that, because he, in this incarnation, in this physical body, in this physical reality, is a man. And the only way that that can change, it's not because you believe differently, because his soul does not exist as Anthony Fauci in the body that he has as a woman. His soul may exist as a woman in some other time-space reality, but then he's not Anthony Fauci, he's someone else. So even quantum physics will not allow that he is a man, even if you don't think he's a man. Now, the only way that could change, because it's possible for that to change, is if he himself, of his own free will, were to choose to have a sex change operation, a gender change operation, in which case he could become a woman. But that's his free will. Nobody else can dictate that to him. So this is an example, because we sometimes, especially us light workers, we get a little confused about what's true and what's truth. And it doesn't matter if you believe something in airy fairyland. If it's not true, it's not true. We have to develop our discernment now to understand the difference between absolute truth and truth that is mere perspective. Perspective is never absolute truth. It can never be absolute truth. It's just a perspective. So another great example, and a more advanced example, would be, one example I love to use is gravity. You don't have to believe in gravity. But if you're in a physical world, whether you believe it or not, gravity is real. However, you can break through the dimensional reality that's based in pure physicality, and when you do, gravity does not have to be real. So gravity is an example that it is absolute absolutely true, but it is not universally true. It's another example of what's true versus truth. But that fact about gravity is true. Another great example is cause and effect. In this reality, and that is universally true too, because it is a universal law, cause and effect is real. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to believe that if you think fearful thoughts, you will attract to you fearful experiences. If you believe something, the cause and effect relationship, and by the way, law of attraction is another example, you will attract that to you by being afraid of the very thing you're afraid of. You can attract it to you, right? That's absolutely true. And it also is universally true because it applies to our whole universe. Cause and effect. Now, multiverse, there are other universes beyond our universe where that may not be true. In fact, it's not all true in other universes. So you see, these kinds of measurements now are what we're going to be waking up to. And this is going to assist us in becoming, in aligning more fully with an ascension journey for everyone, regardless of what we're determining to be true or untrue, true versus truth. The key point is that as we become more aware and discerning, not from a place of skepticism and judgment, but rather from a place of open-minded consideration and a willingness to consider with as much divine neutrality, which means to say non-judgment and non-attachment to one thing or another thing being right or wrong, just consideration of what else there may be, we will be expanding into more of our multidimensional awareness of more and more perspectives, more and more viewpoints and awarenesses that open up to more differentiation between truth and true. What's true and what's absolutely truth, right? Absolute truth. So we have to get very skilled in the coming year, especially, and years, at understanding this and using our discernment. And on what I want to say about this particular portal too that's so relevant is that as people begin to realize that there are truths that they have not been told and that there are other truths that they can consider, this is going to help to further dismantle the old crumbling structures that are based on this false narrative, which are no longer serving us, which are no longer supporting and assisting us in terms of where we are going. And the gift that's most important for all of us is that as we begin to cultivate our ability with a state of this open-minded curiosity and wonder and consideration without as much attachment to it being one way or another, even and especially, this is big for the Lightworker community, not judging something as wrong or bad or negative even. We judge things as negative because it sounds dark or it's conspiracy or something like that. We judge that as negative. So the more neutral we become, by being willing to just explore with open-hearted, open-minded consideration, a sense of wonder. I wonder and the realization that it's not negative or bad just because it's not necessarily of the light or the most beautiful love-based thing. We come into the realization that it's all love. It's all just experience. We don't have to judge something as negative or wrong or bad just because it's not necessarily something that we would desire anymore. You see, through that, we strengthen our discernment. We become more aware because we're no longer in resistance to that which we used to judge as dark or evil or wrong or bad. And that is what further dismantles this old system and these old structures that are based in lies, secrecy, coercion, manipulation, and the so-called false timeline. So in other words, if we can begin to open up to this, even as light workers, from our divine neutral selves, coming into the awareness that there is no wrong, and that even that which we judged to be negative or dark or wrong or bad or evil in the old false timeline, even under this whole kind of narcissistic type of agenda, once we can become more neutral about that, that will further facilitate the shifting, even especially for the collective, as they are waking up more and more to the difference between true and truth. And only from that place of awareness that they're willing, we're all willing, to consider truth with more open-minded wonderment, curiosity, willingness, non-attachment to our judgment of things as wrong, as we are able to do that, that will further facilitate the ascension journey. This part is for us, Lightworkers, so that we can get out of our own resistance to the judgment and the wrongness of the stuff that we haven't wanted to look at either, even though we've known that it was there. And this, by doing this, we allow and assist the awakening for the rest of humanity as they become aware of the truths that were not revealed to them on the false timeline. I hope this is making sense. This is a major part of the portal that is coming over the next year. By the way, I will also add to it that as we, as a collective, regardless of where we are on our own ascension journey, as we are willing to become more neutral and in less judgment, in less of our own duality, as we are more and more willing to do this, we will see the censorship of information also be dismantled. There will be less and less censorship, because we can understand that censorship is a reflection of the parts of us that do not want to know, that are still in resistance, judgment, wrongness. That includes that whole cancel culture, where we are more fully embracing the wholeness of the experience from a place of sacred neutral or divine neutrality, from a place of non-resistance, non-judgment. As we do that, as we invite in more of all truths to be aspects of truths, but not necessarily absolute truth, and as we develop and strengthen our own ability to be discerning, we will find that this part of our transition into more of the light will become more and more effortless and easy and graceful for us. And we will also find that it facilitates more of the awakening for the collective. That is what this massive 2022 portal is all about, and certainly it will be majorly intensified in the coming month of February. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. I hope it makes sense. I realize it's a lot of meaty, juicy content, so please do make sure you watch the other video that's all about the 2022 portal, which is a totally different aspect of how this portal will affect us and what it's about. And this is a complementary video to that. And of course, please do make sure you join us for the upcoming DNA activations webinar that is coming up on February 22nd. You can register and join us for that on February 22nd by going to LoriSpagna.com. Under the Live Events tab, you will find the Speed Activations webinar, and I'll put the links in under the video as well. Okay, you guys, I want to thank you so much. I love you so much, and I see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.